1981 to 2000, we actually credit Gen Yers with so much having to do with technology, and yet Gen Xers are the ones who brought us things like Google. They are the ones who actually innovated, huge innovation. So Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, these are baby boomers, and they brought a huge influx of technology into our world. It's the Gen Yers who simply started to fine-tune that, get a little more creative. So the Gen Yers did bring us things like Facebook, Chatter, Yammer. What's another technology, recent technology that... Twitter, thank you. Yes, of course, Twitter.
YouTube.
Good. Okay. So, moment of truth, and I'm going to ask you to be honest, please. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to identify yourselves with each of these generations. And as I do this, I want everybody else to look around and see what you see, who belongs to which. So, can I ask, if you are a member of the war generation, the veterans, can I ask you to please stand? Please stand.
All those guys over there, come on.
Can you raise your hand if you're a member of the... Okay, great. Baby boomers, can you please stand? Yeah, don't just raise your hand, I want you to stand. It's hard to get up. Around the room, these are the baby boomers. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Have a seat. Gen Xers, can I ask you to please stand? Okay, so slightly more Gen Xers than we have baby boomers, but almost equal. But a little bit more Gen Xers. Great. Gen Yers, can I ask you to stand? Hi, great. Thank you. Okay.
I remember JY.
So, if we are functioning as a team, everyone in this room right now, consider us a team. What does that now just tell you about this team? You're somewhat diversified. Somewhat diversified.
It's a split.
But why do I say somewhat as opposed to varied?
Culturally,
Oh, yeah.
not a wide variation of culture.
Well, we don't know about culture because we haven't checked culture. Right? We don't know. There could be many people from different countries in here. We don't know. Yeah, the majority of this room is from two generations. You're starting
Right,
to get
there are
a
only
really
two
influx
generations.
of Gen Yers, but no one from the war generation. Absolutely none. So that means, statistically speaking, we could lack in innovation, or we could have a blind spot. We could have a blind spot for a customer base that comes from the war generation. Yeah? Because we are missing, we are lacking in that diversity. So one of the things that I'll talk about is what do you do about that? Because again, remember, the more diverse a team, the more innovative. So my question to you is, in your workforces, how many do you have? So if you go back to your company, and you don't have to answer this unless somebody wants to offer a perspective, it'd be great to hear, but how many people do you have in your company from the war generation? How many from baby boomers, Gen Xers, Gen Yers? And what are you doing to actively bring in that brain power? Any thoughts on that? Yes?
Where's the management team?
What's that?
Where is the management team? What generation are they?
Well,
that's a whole other question.
That's a whole, and you know, it's a great question because the management team traditionally, and war generation, veterans, are accustomed to that management team being older, and they report to someone that's older, but boy, is that changing. So if you look at Facebook, for example, Mark Zuckerberg has people reporting to him who are old enough to be his parents. And that is a structure that is changing in business today. So you are having people who are 20 years older reporting to, or 20 years younger reporting to a boss, reporting to a manager. Yeah, which can be very challenging.
Right.
Yes?
Do you Do you look to the outside in when you create your diversity strategy by identifying your customer first?
Great, yes, yes.
And then backing into it? Or
Well,
just going, just to go to a diversity strategy for the sake of it, thinking
Yeah.
that you might get innovation? But if your customer base is not in a certain generation, does it really matter?
Yes, it does matter. So I would say yes, great place to start. But I'd also say that a couple of things about that. Remember that it's just diversity is going to bring out innovation, no matter what your customer base is. It also may expand your customer base in bringing new blood into your company. And that's regardless of, today we're talking about generations, but whether that's cultural, and I'm going to talk about that again in a minute, but ethnicity, whatever that is, you could expand your customer base.
Okay, so it's basically about the possibility.
Yeah, and generally what people do, what companies do is look within and look at, let's first look at what we have. What does the face of our current workforce look like? Now, what do we need to do to start to introduce diversity into our workforce? Then once we start to bring that diversity in, what does that mean for us in terms of innovation? How can we tap into that? Yeah. And this gentleman here and then this gentleman here.
In your company, we do have a couple of people who are of the war generation.
Yeah.
And in both cases, since they have fairly senior and very important positions in the company,
Yeah.
for the one, we paired him up with people who are younger than I am. And
Great.
they're starting to transfer over like some of their day-to-day responsibilities.
Fabulous.
They're getting a more senior, hands-off managerial role.
Yes.
In the case of the other one, he has a very technical role because he's like self-specialized in it over the years, and we're starting to get somebody to actually try and be his assistant to try and soak up that stuff.
Great.
And,
Great.
moving him back up to possibly working from home a couple days a week, so it's a little easier on him.
Yeah.
And then possibly moving him over the years into a consulting.
Great.
Or, on-call type position.
Wonderful. Great. Did everyone hear that? Yeah? So, great example of pairing a war generation, an older person with a younger person. And in fact, so in your case, you're pairing them so that they can transfer knowledge, transfer brain.
We're making a point to pair them with somebody who's 2 generations younger.
2 generations. Oh, so you're specifically saying 2 generations
You don't
younger.
want-
Great.
You don't want to pair somebody who's 70 with somebody who's 50 who's going to be looking to retire in 5 or 6 years.
Right,
Or,
okay.
So
So you're pairing them
With
with
somebody
Gen
who can-
Y or
who can grow into a
younger Gen
position.
Xer.
yeah, somebody who can actually grow into a position.
Great. So great, and not only are companies doing that, a lot of companies are also doing what's called reverse mentoring. So pairing an older employee with a younger employee, who the younger employee can then help that older employee with technology. Because Gen Yers are whizzes at technology. So but sometimes a war generation, not my grandmother, but a war generation person can go, oh, computers, iPhones, oh, what do I do? But to pair and have some reverse mentoring can also be very powerful. So great, good. Okay. Any other thoughts on this in terms of how many generations do you have in your workforce, what you're doing to create innovation? Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Now, how do you possibly bridge that possible conflict in generations?
Ah, thank you. Yeah, good question. Actually, I'm jumping ahead a bit, but you're absolutely right that conflict is a natural outcome of diversity. But so is innovation, and there is a tie between the two. So it's interesting, most of the literature out there right now is around how do we manage conflict between these generations, because there's going to be a lot of conflict when you have a clash of values and world perspectives. And what I would say, and towards the end I'll get into this in a little more detail, but what I'd say is that it's not about trying to get rid of the conflict, because it's actually what studies are showing, it's through the conflict that the innovation happens. But it's teaching people healthy conflict management. How do we engage in creative conflict? That's where the ideas come out of that. So, great question. Yeah. Any other questions before I move on? Yes.
Just to add on to that, to this gentleman here, in the companies I've run, we typically run an intern program, but we specifically target a younger generation that's going to a career track.
Yeah.
So I'm in the healthcare business. We either target people that are going in to be a doctor or nurse and that type of deal,
Yeah.
and incorporate them into understanding the business side of it. So you get that special sauce of a clinical person later on that gets interacting with people that actually run the business of healthcare, and then teachers. I mean, I
Right.
would tell everybody, the fact that they don't make a lot of money in the future, but their communication skills, their people sensitivity, and everything about them. I mean, they're just special individuals for anybody in the college ranks going in to becoming a teacher. And they really do challenge, no matter what age group it is,
Yeah.
in order to be a better writer, a better communicator, and more sensitive from a point of service perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, and good point about bringing teachers in, and also what a lot of companies are doing now is bringing back their retirees, so they have alumni associations, to bring back their retirees to act as volunteers in the workforce. And that's another way of bringing them back as teachers, as mentors. I believe it's Dell has a resource pool of retirees who, if they can choose to join as a volunteer, they can be on call, or they can actually be eligible for short-term projects, 2-month projects, so they can come back and work for 2 months and bring their expertise. So that's another way that companies are tapping into that teacher, but also the older generation, because they have so much value to offer. Let me go through the generations in terms of workforce. So 2006, 8% of war generation in the U.S. workforce. 2011, 5%. But as I said, interesting about this statistic, the projection is that 5% will actually grow. Some are saying will grow as high as 12% over the next 5 years because they'll be coming back to work. It's funny, my 96-year-old grandmother said, I'd like to go back to work. She worked all her life and was very successful, and she said, I retired too early. I think I'd like to go back to work.